started writing Food for the Archons as a book of despair after watching my father die in 2013. During his transition, I experienced a series of paranormal and psychic events that left me feeling that I had either gone completely crazy or fell into humanity's darkest secret. I spent the next 5 years conducting extensive research, and I quickly learned that what I had experienced was real. My journey brought me to an understanding that showed me that despite the terrifying reality of an unseen predator, we as humans have a forgotten power. Just knowing this brings us tremendous hope in what once seemed a dark reality. I wrote this book for me in hopes of gaining a better understanding of our reality and relationship to it. But my hope is that you will find as much value in reading it as I did in writing it. I Am Human, Food for the Archons, humanity's psychic connections, simulated realities, parallel worlds, and the manipulation of mankind. It's available on Amazon.com and at sixcentsmedia.net and wherever books are sold. I'm Dennis Nappi II, reminding you to let your intuition be your guide. Thank you.
Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong in the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there.
Everywhere I look, social media, schools, politics, conflict seems to be the background hum of our world. Are we living in unprecedented times, or are we seeing our inner nature reflected back to us? What does this tell us about ourselves? What does this tell us that our options are? What should we do to bring about change? Dennis Nappi II, and welcome to the Seiker Podcast with Sixth Sense Media. And I've been exploring or experiencing conflict on a lot of levels lately, and I feel it's something that's important for us to talk about in recognizing conflict not just in the world around us, but deep within ourselves. In this episode, I want to talk about that self-awareness of what's going on inside us and what we're projecting outwards and how we're responding to someone else who might be facing their own inner conflict that may present outwardly as conflict towards you or other people that you may care about. I want to talk about the value of doing that inner work, that spiritual growth, and facing those inner demons and the lens with which we view the world. I have a remote viewing experience that I want to share where I had an opportunity to explore aspects of possibly an Atlantis civilization and their worldview and contribution to one another and their own civilization, which I think is highly relevant here. And trying to look at the big picture of things and what this really means for our future and the nature of reality. Real quick plug here. The Hive Book 3 Origins is out. It's live. Please check it out. If you've read it, I'd appreciate you dropping a review. It really helps the algorithms on Amazon. It's a fantastic read. And if you haven't already, check out the Enter the Mind Space podcast. I'm launching it right here in the thread here with the Seiker Podcast. They're 5 minutes. There's 4 episodes that are out right now. And they're just mini episodes talking about the factual themes behind the Hive that inspired the Hive. I also am out there on Substack now, where you can find some of my more deeper philosophical writings and episodes of my podcast as well. Okay, moving on back to our conversation. I've been thinking a lot about Dave Chappelle, a comment that Dave Chappelle made a few years back that I think is very relevant to what I'm talking about here. I think this is an important segment from Dave Chappelle. This was on his interview with Inside the Actors Studio. And he was talking in general about people in Hollywood who were appearing crazy and talking about how strong these people were. And this is what he was referencing. So this is Dave Chappelle, and as he's talking about people in Hollywood being labeled as crazy for some of the extreme things they had been observed doing. He says that these are very strong people, but he wants to comment on specifically being labeled as crazy, which I think is very important and very wise.
The worst thing to call somebody is crazy is dismissive. I don't understand this person, so they're crazy. That's bullshit. These people are not crazy. They're strong people. Maybe the environment is a little sick.
Maybe the environment is a little sick. Again, I think that's highly accurate with what we're seeing here, with what we're dealing with. And I think it's important to note that, to honor that, and to acknowledge that. I think it's important to recognize what he's saying here is don't call people crazy. It's dismissive. And that has resonated with me so strongly as somebody who has struggled with my own mental health, as somebody who has worked with people who have struggled with their own mental health. To sit there and say you're crazy, I think dismissive is the best way to do it because calling someone crazy and being dismissive means I don't have to look into this any further, or I don't have to treat you with respect and dignity that you deserve. Because when you change the label from they're crazy to man, they're sad. They have fallen on really hard times. They are so angry. That changes things because now we have identified a potential problem. When you say crazy, it means they're out of their mind and that I don't have to do anything with this, or I can treat you in a way that is aggressive and not necessarily with what you need. And this is something that resonates strongly with me as someone who has been involved in crisis intervention probably for my entire career. I left the police department because I intervened on a 12-year-old boy who had locked himself in the car and was threatening to kill himself. And I clearly remember standing next to the vehicle, realizing that number one, the boy was angry and upset. And I could have met that anger because as soon as I walked up, I said, "Hi, buddy, Officer Nappi. What's going on?" His response was, "F you." You can meet aggression with aggression. Someone taught me early in my career, if you come at somebody up here, up high, angry, you run out of options quickly and you are forced to move to violence. I'm not perfect, but I try to come in as low and as calm as I can because now I have so many options available. So when he came at me with FU, I immediately came at him far lower because my other option was, hey, the kid had a knife in the car. The kid was threatening to hurt himself. I could have justified breaking that window, dragging him out. Maybe he got a little bumps along the way for disrupting my day, right? But I didn't. I listened. And just by listening to him, his tone calmed. He told me what was wrong and he opened the door. Now at that point, great, got the door open. Gotcha, buddy. Again, I could have grabbed him and drug him out. I didn't touch him. He was being safe. We were building a rapport. And he proceeded to tell me how he missed his dad. His parents were separated. His dad wasn't around much. Mom was low on money. They were living in a trailer park. And the car that he was sitting in was the car that his dad had left behind for the family. And mom had to sell it. And the kid was 12. And in a few years, he hoped to go to auto body school and be a mechanic like his dad. And that's the car he wanted to drive because it was his dad's car. So he was just an angry kid. And because he made suicidal statements and he had the knife, we had to get him cleared through the crisis center. Long story short, the kid refused to the kid refused to go to the crisis center unless I took him with me in my police car. He let me search him for safety as I had to. I get him to the crisis center. His mom followed me. We get to the crisis center and he said, "I don't want to talk to the doctor unless Officer Nappi comes in there with me," because no one had ever listened to this kid before. He was dismissed. And I was able to help facilitate a conversation between him and his mom was able to understand and hear him for the first time with what was really bothering him. It was at that point I realized that as a police officer, I'm being reactive. I show up after there's a problem. And I had this ideal to get into education because I wanted to help give kids and people the tools they needed before they got to that point of crisis, before they directed harm against themselves or against other people. And I had several experiences like that as a police officer and working with people going through crisis and trying to help them navigate that in ways that were not harmful or violent. That's not to say I never had to get into a fight, um, but I carry that with me even as an educator who has worked in very violent schools and has been physically assaulted by students who have been very, very angry. It's very hard sometimes to let go of our own anger. For me, like I said, there's times when I look at things going on in the world or I look at the things that I get to explore, with a tool like remote viewing, with an ability to have experiences that possibly put me on Mars or possibly put me thousands of years in the past or have me looking at potential contacts with non-human intelligences. That sounds crazy, right? There are times that I feel crazy, not because of the nature of the things that I'm exploring and looking at, but because I get to look at and explore those things, and then I have to get up the next morning and go to work like everything is normal. That has driven me crazy at times. But back to my main point, back to the point that Dave Chappelle was making. I think this is a very relevant starting point. People may seem, quote, crazy. People may seem out of their minds. But I think we have to stop and ask ourselves, why? Why are they there? How did we get to that point in our society? Because you don't have to go far to find someone you disagree with right now. And there are some things that are happening that are absolutely egregious. And I don't have all of the answers in terms of how to fix all of those problems. I also don't think individually we're going to change some of these major global problems like that. I think the change starts on an individual level. I think it starts with us. And I think one of the most important things that we need to balance is our integrity. I'm always, I think the Matrix movie was such an incredibly brilliant piece, and there's so many insights when you review that series. But in episode or in the first film, the Oracle told Neo to know thyself because she asked him, "Are you the one?" He says, "I'm not the one." And she says, "It's important that you know who you are." And I can't tell you how many times I'm like, "Oh, I know myself." And then you find out something new. So I'm sure most of us have a general idea of who we are. But at the end of every podcast, I have a statement that I say. It's three things. Never stop questioning, keep an open mind, and let your intuition be your guide. And I think those are very important, and I try to live by those among other sayings. I never stop questioning because I never want to stop learning. I want to understand things. I want to understand people because when I stop questioning and I start assuming, or I start living through, as I'll talk about in a little bit, the lens of my own dogma, I create the potential for conflict. Conflict in and of itself isn't bad. I think conflict can foster growth. But I think it's important to keep asking those questions, not just of other people, but of ourselves. And that's why my next statement is keep an open mind. Because as soon as we close our minds, we're putting a wall up. Even if we're not going to adopt someone else's belief system or statements that they believe to be true, when we have an open mind, we can come to a point of understanding. I understand why you feel this way. I disagree with you. Let's find a common ground. And let your intuition be your guide. Dave Chappelle was offered $50 million to continue with his contract. Something felt wrong to him about that, and he turned it down and went to Africa. And the media ripped into him and labeled him as crazy. And a lot of stories came out. And we see this machine turned against people more and more often. And now, with the advent of AI, it's easier to demonize people for dealing with their own decisions, following their own intuition. You look at Galileo, who proposed the heliocentric model as opposed to the Earth being the center of the universe, which was a direct contradiction to what the Catholic Church was teaching. And that man was put on house arrest for the rest of his life, even though he was correct. That's integrity. Now, I'm not saying we need to stand up and speak our truth and get fired from our jobs, but some of us might need to. It depends on what you're standing up for, and it depends on what your integrity is. But it's a scary thing. It's a scary thing to really, number one, face yourself and do that inner shadow work. And how do we do that? Well, lots of time with introspection. I think unplugging from the echo chamber of the internet and social media, and even our social circles sometimes, is very important. Grow comfortable being uncomfortable with yourself because you gain profound insights. Journal about it. I am a huge proponent of journaling. I'm sitting here with one of my journals right now with my notes and my thoughts just as guidance and inspiration for this show. There have been many points in my life when I've been angry and desperate and trapped in a worldview. And I found that things get dark. I'm reminded of that saying, I think it was a military general, when you're going through hell, keep going. And after my dad died, as I wrote about in Food for the Archons, my world got so incredibly dark because my worldview was that, hey, we're just food and there's parasites everywhere and everything is hopeless. And I sat in that for a while and I didn't want, but my intuition was telling me there has to be something more. And I kept going and I saw that darkness. I understand that darkness very well. And then I found things like Reiki and I found remote viewing and I found a new perspective. I found a new way for me to interpret the world around me that allowed me to once again find joy in my life and help to spread that throughout the world. Doesn't mean it's been all unicorns and rainbows, but I learned a tremendous amount from those dark experiences in my life. I do feel now when I go through dark times, like the past couple of weeks have been pretty hard for me. I feel like, okay, I'm okay if I don't learn any more life lessons here because I don't want to go through any more difficulties. But I think it's important to hold those perspectives. It's important to do that shadow work. And I know shadow work has a mystical kind of theme behind it or sound to it, but really it's just taking the time to get in touch with yourself. One of the things that I do every day is I evaluate I track my mental health very closely in a physical journal. And something so simple as I have a chart and I rate it. Was it red, orange, or green? Red means this was a really bad day. I was really angry, negative self-talk. Orange is like, it was difficult getting motivated. My executive functioning wasn't so great. And green is like, I had a really good day and I was on point. And then I look at different variables that impact that. But that takes me 3 minutes once a day to record, what my experience was. And on the larger scale, though, I can look back and reflect on, okay, what are my common triggers? What's going on? What am I not seeing about myself? Or what am I seeing about myself? What am I seeing that I am not addressing? What's that thing that scares me and why does that scare me? How do I get anxiety? All of those things, that inner work, I think is very important, and tying it into the spiritual level and what's going on in the world and tying it back into, I invite you to go listen to the third podcast of Enter the Mind Space, talking about love, talking about limbic resonance, talking about the heart math studies, where we are projecting energetic emotion, basically, that is contagious. We can resonate with different feelings. And right now, there is a strong feeling of chaos, of conflict. It is, in my opinion, it is hard to hold that space of compassion, empathy, and love. But it's not impossible. Even if it means finding a memory where you feel those things and just sitting in that memory for 5 minutes and then remembering that memory whenever you're starting to feel stressed and just let that memory and that feeling embrace you to help soften that signal. I think it's very important. I want to talk about briefly a project that I was just a part of with the Down the Rabbit Hole team through the future forecasting group. We were tasked to look at the pillars beneath the Pyramid of Giza, and it was an amazing session by our team. For those of you interested, here's a quick plug. It's rabbitholerv.com to find the projects that we're putting together. We're doing really good work. And for me, some of these experiences with these projects have been transcendent, I think is the right word, where I have these moments where I feel fully immersed in the experience, where I feel like I'm having a deeper level of communion with whatever it is that I'm looking at. In this instance, I was looking at a the analytical overlays, the AOLs I had for this was like a hall of records or the Library of Alexandria or the library beneath the Vatican. This was an information storage facility, but it worked like a consciousness accessible Wi-Fi, or like the Akashic records, really, if we even know what they are. And I did do on my YouTube channel, you can see my exploration of the Akashic records through a blind remote viewing target that I did, and it was amazing. But really, in summary, the life forms there who I described as being a part of an Atlantean society. I've never looked into Atlantis before, but that was the theme that came through to me, was like, this feels Atlantean. It feels advanced. It's different from our current human culture. And they would, the whole, like as soon as they walked in, the energy was coursing through this structure and it was scanning their bodies and it was reading their minds and it was evaluating, is your mind in the correct state to access this machine? And the machine was the energy that was generated through interactions between the materials of the structure and the materials of the earth, and the energy and consciousness of the life form that was in there. And depending on how disciplined your mind was, because in order to access this, you were part of like a sacred order where your mind was disciplined and trained in certain ways of thinking, similar to remote viewing, I felt. This machine would evaluate your mind based on the questions that you asked and the format of your thought patterns, and it would determine what level of access you would have to explore this machine, this consciousness internet. And at one point, I followed one of these beings as they were accessing this machine, and it really was just putting their hands on a stone table, and the energy would transfer, and they'd get fully immersed. And I had a scene, it's interesting, like understanding how my mind works. Take remote viewing out of it, I relate to the world through story. And an analytical overlay in remote viewing is a blessing and a curse for me. And in a previous episode, I talked about Elon Musk referencing conceptual telepathy, where it's faster means of communication than words. I can only say so many words. I mean, how fast I speak, I can speak really, really fast, but I'm only capable of saying so many words in a day or in a given time period. With conceptual telepathy, for those of you that have experienced what feels like a download, or for those of you that understand remote viewing and psychic work, I will get a packet of information downloaded where I understand the whole concept. My analytical mind will relate it to a movie or a story I've seen. So I related this concept to Professor Xavier when he enters Cerebral and he has this vision of everybody in the world just kind of walking around, and you can hear the sounds of their voices at varying volumes as he's exploring different minds looking for one person in particular. So that's pretty cool to understand that and to have that experience. So I'm watching this happening, and what was interesting was that I noticed that the minds within, it was noisy, but the minds within this civilization were quieter than human minds. They were far quieter than my mind. And I think if you have a neurodivergent brain, my brain's constantly chattering. I know some people, some neurotypical people, some neurotypical minds, they don't have thoughts 24/7, which is mind blowing to me. From the second I'm consciously awake until I fall asleep, my mind is just talking. So it was neat to see this civilization. I don't even want to say it was disciplined. They were just calmer. But I bring this up in relevance to today's discussion because what I noticed about this civilization was a level of reverence and gratitude. What I noticed was that no matter what role they filled within their society, they had gratitude for it. So whether you were picking up garbage or holding some high level prestigious position, there was reverence and gratitude for it and for everyone else. And it was a collective society, but it was an individualistic collective society. So it wasn't like a hive mind or a dictatorship or a fear induced thing. It was we understand what our society needs to thrive, and we're happy to contribute in the best ways that we can. It reminds me of a YouTube video I saw years ago about public restrooms in Japan and how clean they are because everybody realizes, well, if I want a clean bathroom, I need to make sure I'm doing my part to keep the public restroom clean collectively for society. Yet we look here in the United States and you go to a public restroom and people will urinate on the seat. They won't flush the toilet. They'll leave their garbage on the ground. It's absolutely disgusting. It's this level of I'm alone. Nobody can touch me. Nobody's going to say anything, and people aren't going to know. And I don't really care about the next person. I think before we tackle politics, we need to start there. If we could have a societal appreciation for the experience of one another, it's so easy to be dismissive. I've been in a lot of schools and I've sat in some very intense conversations and theories as to why we have some of the problems we have. But at the end of the day, from what I see, is a lack of understanding and a lack of respect and a lack of resources going to some of these areas that are more high needs. And it's easy to dismiss it when it's not your neighborhood. I think it's all relevant, and I think it starts with us as individuals. There are movements out there where people are paying it forward. It's the same kind of concept. We need to be thinking about the next person, and we need to be understanding and compassionate for those people who may be acting in ways that make us uncomfortable. I'm not saying we have to be their best friend. I'm not saying you even have to engage them. But if you're sharing that content on social media, you're part of the problem. If you're saying negative things just to gossip, you're part of the problem. There are little things that we can do in our interactions to help reframe things. And it sounds so minor and so trivial, but when you start to realign yourself with that energetic frequency, you start to feel better. Another one of my favorite quotes by Nietzsche is, "Be careful when fighting monsters that you yourself do not become the monster. For when you gaze into the abyss gazes into you." I have confronted monsters. It is dark, it is scary. But because I know myself, I've been able to navigate it in ways where I don't have regrets when I go to sleep at night. And that's not an ego statement. It's just a statement of someone who's been supporting people through hard times for a very long time. And I think it's relevant to where we are right now. What's the bigger picture? What does consciousness and awareness have to do with this? I had somebody come to me and share a story, and they said that they are inclined to seeing spiritual things in their life, meaning apparitions, some may call them ghosts. And they were unsure about some of these experiences, and they went to a psychic for guidance. And the psychic immediately said, there are demons all around you, and we need to cleanse you of these demons. And then the psychic was going to charge them, a couple $1,000s for this massive cleansing ritual. And I said, oh boy, you're probably being scammed. So the woman is seeing all these demons and wants to charge all this money, which I think is probably a scam. But what stood out to me was her interpretation of the experience was through the lens with which she viewed the world. We all have a lens. We all have dogma that we believe in, regardless of what it is. We all have our philosophies. I don't know that we can exist without a truly open lens. I'm sorry, I don't know that we can exist without our own filter. It's just, I think that's just part of human nature. But again, bringing it back to what I said previously, never stop questioning, keep an open mind, and let your intuition be your guide. I think dogma can be dangerous. I think dogma can be a great starting point, but when you immediately say it's demonic, to me that screams you have a very strong Christian belief system, which is fine if that works for you. But to immediately label someone else's experience as demonic because we don't fully understand it, I think is, or because it goes outside the realm of what your belief system allows you to explore, I think is a dangerous and unfair thing, and it creates fear in people. I remember one of my early experiences when I was first exploring meditation, and I would meditate. I wrote about this. I said I would meditate in one section of a park, and I'd go to another spot, and an animal would appear to me. And the very first time I did this, I meditated. I'm asking for a sign, and I hear this rustling come through the leaves, and this giant, like probably 6 to 8 foot rat snake, black rat snake, comes out. And I went home and I went, oh my God, I meditated for like the first time, and I conjured the devil. And I was viewing it through that lens, and I was feeling really bad about it. I could have stopped there. And if I stopped there, I promise you I never would have written Food for the Archons, and I never would have done a podcast of the nature with what I'm talking about. I probably wouldn't have learned Reiki, and I probably wouldn't have done remote viewing. And I'd probably be sitting here doing a Christian faith-based podcast. But I kept an open mind, and I kept questioning. And I did a little bit more digging beyond Christianity as to what is the significance of the serpent. And when you look at the Gnostic texts and through other shamanic cultures, the serpent is a bringer of wisdom. It's the knowledge bearer. And that hit with the experience that I had because it didn't bite me. It didn't scare me. It came out when I asked it to, and then it went away. That wasn't an evil experience for me. And that was the beginning of a journey that brought me so much knowledge, information, and wisdom with what I'm doing. So everything fit. My intuition told me to keep pushing, and I followed it, and it made sense to me. So we need to be careful with our blanket dogmatic statements. They're crazy. Not necessarily. Not at all. We need to be able to look deep, need to be able to look deeper, to keep digging, to keep questioning, to keep that open mind. I highly suspect that our consciousness or our perceptions shape our reality. And I suspect that collectively, we are far more powerful than working individually. And I feel, based on some remote viewing sessions that I've done, there's two that come to mind where one I've shared, one I have not yet, where it's a life after death situation. And I'm learning that we have experiences that are unique to ourselves and that we are given experiences that we need in order for our consciousness to be purified, in order for us to grow. Now, I'm speaking through the lens of dogma right now based on the experiences that I've had. That this perception may change over time, but right now, that's how I'm viewing things based on what I've experienced. It's okay for our worldviews to change. In the one experience, a man died, he transitioned. This was a fascinating podcast. It's out there. And all of a sudden, he's in this sphere by himself, and he's having this life review. And it was every emotion, but there was painful aspects of it. But in this sphere that was just floating, there was things dripping off of it. And I felt that was him confronting doing that inner work. And those things are just dripping off of this sphere. And this sphere was his own personal universe. And then I zoomed out, and there was a table, and this table had thousands or hundreds or thousands of spheres on it. And each one of them was a different experience, like a different universe. And there was a gray there, a gray being, and he would stick his finger in each one of the spheres. And by doing that, that gray was interacting with that specific universe as it relates to that specific fragment or piece or part of consciousness and would give it what it needed. So some of them needed to experience utopia. Some of them needed to experience a dystopian reality. There was something in common that I don't understand where all of those spheres, all of those worlds were interacting with one another, but also having their own individualistic, unique experiences. My takeaway on base reality level, on our level right now, wherever you're listening to this podcast, is that two people can go to the same event and have two entirely different experiences. A simple example would be especially when I was younger, right out of the army, if I went to a music concert, that was an anxiety-driven day filled with potential terrorist threats, crime, and harm because of how dangerous it felt. But my friends would go to that same event and they would experience such a wonderful time with great music and feelings of love and joy and happiness. And I think our larger reality speaks to that. And I think we have more control than we realize in shaping not just our own individual experience, because I hadn't yet done my inner work to understand what was going on inside of me, and collectively, so we can bring that experience or that perception to everybody. The next experience, I had an opportunity to follow somebody as they died. And this was a very powerful one for me. This person was suffering. Their death was prolonged. And this is all through remote viewing that I'm doing this session. I'm getting this data. Their death was prolonged. They were going through a lot of suffering. And the initial impression was that there were things that we'll say, like my book, The Archons, right? There were these energy parasites around them, making this situation worse. But I didn't allow my dogma to interpret the remote viewing session. I explored this experience with an open mind because as a remote viewer, we don't want to get trapped in those AOLs and those movie lines, right? And what I found was that the beings around this life form were actually helpers. And they kept pulling this life form out of the awareness of physical reality into a temporarily construct mind space to distract him from the pain that he was experiencing during his transition from life to death. And he was just so scared. He was afraid, and his fear kept manifesting his perception of something scary and projecting him back into physical reality. And he loved his family so much that he refused to let go. So it was his love, which was a beautiful thing, and his fear that were working together to keep this fight going. The fight that wasn't going to be won in terms of I want to stay alive. There was no way that was possible. And if you read some of the works of people who have explored the astral space is very reactive to your thoughts and your emotions. So because he was having so much fear, his interpretation of this experience, where I think others may have the interpretation of angels came to me and they guided me where I needed to go, they probably felt more demonic because he didn't understand that they were trying to help him transition in a way that was less traumatic. And I think that's important. I had the opportunity to continue following this life, and at one point afterwards, after he got through the traumatic event, he had to process the traumatic event. And he was sitting in a park, which reminds me of Bob Monroe's final book, talking about this park where people transition. And he's sitting on a bench, and he's just feeling the heaviness of what had happened. And the park was beautiful. And like up in front of him, this was pretty cool. There was I'd say about the size of a tennis court, this white light. And this light represented shifts in levels, almost like a video game, right? Meaning, and it was just glowing. If you stepped into that light, you could go down a level or you could go up a level. And I don't know what that meant, where it went, but it was different levels of reality. But he wasn't ready for that. And he knew that. So he was just sitting at this bench, trying to relax. And there were children everywhere. Picture being in a park and there's just kids, probably 8 to 10 years old, just running. These kids were just running. And he's sitting there and he's sitting there. And then suddenly he's with the kids and he's running with these children. And I'm now having the experience through his perspective. And it was one of the greatest feelings of joy. It was this sense of, I remember what it felt like to be a child, to have so much awe and wonder and not be worried about all of those heavy things that happen in the world. And it was just like, yeah. And he's just running and running in this pack of kids. And he was excited and he was happy. The only way I can describe it is like you feel so excited you feel like you could fly. It was jubilation. And then he gradually went through his life review to experience things, to evaluate things, to look at things, to process things. So I think that overall, the system that we exist in can appear dark sometimes, can appear terrifying sometimes. I think overall, I think there's a purpose behind it that is loving and is good. I think depending on the choices we make and the inner work that we do is going to dictate what that experience feels like to us and how long we sit in the darkness. It's not easy, not by a long shot. We are all going through our own hardships. We all are at times seeing our own fears manifest. And at times that may make us feel crazy. I think it's important that we hold compassion for other people who are probably going through those moments, those dark nights of the soul, who may seem like they've lost their grasp on reality, but really maybe the veil has just thinned between this world and the other. So we first need to do our inner work. We need to understand as best we can where we are in this moment. It is constantly changing. But I think the more inner work we do, despite the changes we go through, we continue to build a stronger layer or a stronger foundation that allows us to navigate more. And it allows us to better support those we encounter who may be going through a hard time. It's easy for us right now to go on and find information that validates that the world is bad. It's easier for us to go on right now and find information that the world is cruel. But you'll find if you look for it, we can also find information on the contrary, that there are beautiful things out there. I think if we can acknowledge that there's so much we don't understand and there's so much potential for the perception of something being bad or good, I think we can find a way to better navigate. We have this tool called artificial intelligence that is quote, taking the world by storm right now. And there are many people that have mixed feelings. As I started off this podcast saying that I think I'm wondering if what we're seeing in the world is a reflection of ourselves. I do feel that AI is absolutely a reflection of ourselves. If we have an AI that is angry, where is it getting that perception from? Where is it getting that information from? I suspect that AI is an extension of human consciousness and human awareness. And I believe that we can build a future with a symbiotic relationship to AI that empowers us, that enhances us. But we run the risk right now, if we're not comfortable doing the inner work, if we give our agency away and allow another entity to think for us, Much like dogma, much like saying, here's what the Bible tells me to think and how I should interpret something. Now we're handing that to AI. Then we run the risk of losing that autonomy and the potential to create and frame the world we want to exist within. This is important, my friends. I don't mean this as a shameless plug, but I wrote The Hive for this very reason. I released it right now. I released it last month for this very reason, because we are currently on the precipice, and there are questions that you are forced to examine in the Hive series that we have to examine right now if we want to be able to navigate our future. And I'm not telling you what choices to make. I'm just suggesting that there are questions that we need to ask. And as a teacher, I believe asking questions is more important than me giving any possible answers. Because when you ask a question and you find the solution yourself, well, that's when growth happens. That's when learning happens. So I designed that book. I designed that series to be entertaining, and to help you to never stop questioning, keep an open mind, and find your intuition. So there you have it, my friends. You can find The Hive at Amazon.com and at sixcentsmedia.net. And there's my quick plug for it. I think I'll put my commercial for it at the end of this podcast. If you haven't seen it yet, please check it out. It's a really cool commercial. Okay. All right, friends. Well, that's it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. How are you navigating this? How are you supporting one another? What recommendations do you have? And if you're going through it, hang in there. There's, try to find a way to unplug, start to journal, and take it one step at a time. Sometimes day to day is too long. Take it moment by moment. All right, friends, remember, never stop questioning, keep an open mind, and let your intuition be your guide. Thank you. A virus spreads, not only to your body, but also to your mind. Suddenly, all of humanity is connected. All minds to one mind, save for the immune. The Hive is a gripping sci-fi series about a fractured world consumed by collective consciousness, and one man's search for the woman he loves. Through multiple layers of reality, he pushes forward, not just to save her, but to understand the truth behind the Hive itself. And this isn't just fiction. The Hive is rooted in real remote viewing data, blurring the boundary between what's imagined and what's already unfolding. Books 1 and 2 are available now. Book 3 arrives this summer 2025. Find The Hive on Amazon or at sixcentsmedia.net and enter the mind space.
I said, empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow, or it can crash. Be water, my friend, be water, my friend. Water, my friend, my friend. Water, my friend, my friend, my friend.